Listen to part of a talk in a history class. The settlement of the American colonies.
Today we are going to begin discussing the settlement of the American colonies. We will be dividing our discussions into three parts: Virginia, New England, and the Middle Colonies. Today I want to focus on Virginia. In the 1580s, Queen Elizabeth I granted Sir Walter Raleigh possession of lands across the ocean which had been claimed by an English explorer about 100 years earlier. Raleigh was a daring young man who knew that the Spanish controlled the high seas and that they did not want England to gain a foothold in the Americas. He believed there were great riches in the New World that England could enjoy. He also knew that there was a great risk in founding a settlement and that he needed to plan carefully before trying to establish a colony in the New World. Raleigh organized an expedition of men and ships to set sail to the New World. Raleigh did not make the journey himself, but appointed John White to lead the group and to become governor of the new colony once they arrived. In 1587, about 100 settlers traveling in 3 ships reached Roanoke Island off the shore of the present-day state of North Carolina. White realized food supplies would dwindle before the settlers could harvest a crop of their own, so he returned to England to gather more supplies. Before White returned to England, his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, was born on Roanoke. She was the first child born of English parents on the island. Once White reached England, he was unable to return to Roanoke for nearly 3 years because of the problems on the high seas between England and Spain. When White did return to Roanoke, no one was on the island. All the settlers had disappeared. Today, no one knows what happened to the settlers, and the colony is called the Lost Colony. Englishmen did not give up the idea of founding a colony in the New World. In 1606, a group formed the London Company, and they received a document, or a charter, from King James I of England, which granted the London Company the right to mine areas for gold and silver, and settle and trade along the Atlantic Ocean shores in an area called Virginia. The men in this company contributed money and used their investment to obtain people who wanted to settle in Virginia. They also purchased supplies for the new settlers. The owners of the London Company hoped that the settlers' trading and mining ventures would be successful and be more than enough to repay them for their investment. In 1607, the shipload of settlers landed on the Virginia shore, and they traveled up a river they named the James River in honor of King James. They founded a settlement along the shores of the river and named their settlement Jamestown. During the first years at Jamestown, the settlers suffered great hardships. The land was swampy and mosquitoes were plentiful. Many people died of malaria and others almost starved because the men had not planted crops. John Smith took over the leadership of the settlement and made friends with the Native Americans, the Indians. He traded with the Indians and required the settlers to begin planting crops. One of the crops they learned to grow was tobacco. The struggles were not really over until 1610, when 3 ships arrived, bringing more supplies. After the ships arrived, the colony began to prosper. One of the reasons the colony prospered was that tobacco began to be grown in large quantities, and the settlers began shipping the crop to England to be sold in Europe. Today, there is a reconstructed village of Jamestown on the site where the original village stood. Have any of you visited this reconstruction? No? It is certainly a site you will want to visit at some point in your life. Have any of you read about the reconstructed village?
Yes, I read brochures that my parents and little sister brought back from a visit last summer.
What do you remember your family saying about Jamestown?
Well, I know it is part of the National Park System and that they call it Jamestown Settlement.
Do you remember them saying anything specific about the actual site?
Sure, my dad said they have built replicas of the 3 ships that brought the settlers to the colony and that they are docked at the site. He also told me that visitors can go on board the ships. I think he said the names of the ships were the Susan Constant, Godspeed, and Discovery.
I remember from my visit that they're doing archaeological diggings. Do you have any idea why they may be interested in doing that?
Well, probably to see how the people lived and to see what their daily lives were like. Also, maybe to find the outlines of the fort and other buildings.
Exactly. The artifacts can tell us a lot about the early years at Jamestown. The cemetery can also give us information which will better help us understand what went on there. There is also a glass blowing factory on site. Did you know that European glass blowers came as early settlers and tried to establish glass blowing as Jamestown's first industry? As historians and archaeologists are trying to uncover Jamestown's past to learn more about the settlement, they uncovered the ruins of furnaces used for glass blowing. Today, as a result, a company is making glass on site the way the early settlers made glass, and they are firing the glass in furnaces like the ones that were used during colonial times. The main difference, though, is that the furnaces are heated by natural gas and not wood, which the early settlers used. Glass production at Jamestown is also a result of historical research and archaeological exploration. All that is found is going to help planners prepare for the Jamestown 2007 celebration, which will commemorate the settlement's 400th year. Jamestown is an important site in America's history, and hopefully someday you will be fortunate enough to visit it. But as history students, you know there are many important events and sites in our country. Next class, we will talk about the settlement of New England. As you prepare, I want you to think about the similarities and differences between the two types of colonies.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer.
Number 12. What is the talk mainly about? Number 13. Why does the professor mention Sir Walter Raleigh? Number 14. What does the professor say about Jamestown? Number 15. According to the professor, what is the significance of tobacco being grown in Jamestown? Number 16. Why does the professor discuss the archaeological digs that have taken place in Jamestown?
Listen again to part of the talk, then answer the question.
Next class, we will talk about the settlement of New England. As you prepare, I want you to think about the similarities and differences between the two types of colonies.
Number 17. Why does the professor say this?
I want you to think about the similarities and differences between the two types of colonies.
Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class. Algae.
Today we are going to talk about algae. First, you must remember that alga is the singular and algae the plural. Algae are aquatic organisms. They are plant species that may be uni- or multicellular, and they contain chlorophyll, thrive in wet conditions, and usually lack roots, stems, and leaves. They can range in size from tiny single-cell organisms to huge giant kelp. The term algae applies to several groups of aquatic organisms which are capable of photosynthesis or manufacturing their own food. Algae are interesting because they can be colorful. Most people think of algae as green seaweed, but algae can not only be green but can also be red, brown, or blue-green. The main focus of this lecture will be on the types of colored algae. Later lectures will be directed to other characteristics of algae. Brown algae are chromists. The name chromista means colored. Most chromists are colored, but some, such as mildew, may be colorless. They do not store their energy in the form of starch like other plants, and in addition to containing chlorophyll, they contain other pigments which give them a golden or brown color. Some chromists are not photosynthetic, and in the past were classed as animals or fungi rather than as plants. However, today it is recognized that all of the chromista may have developed from an independent evolutionary line from a common ancestor of plants, animals, and fungi. And thus the new kingdom of chromista was born. Even though there is not complete agreement on how all of the chromists are interrelated, new research is being conducted which may explain the interrelationship between them. Green algae is very diverse. There are more than 7,000 species of green algae, and they grow in very diverse habitats. They contain two forms of chlorophyll, capture light energy, and manufacture their own food. They are also mainly aquatic, but don't share a common relationship with the chromists or the rhodophyta organisms. Some of you may have seen green growth attached to rocks in the ocean. This may be sea lettuce. Both green kelp and lettuce are examples of green algae. Their sizes can be microscopic or giant, and they are very important in aquatic ecosystems. Kelp is a chromist, and in fact, coastlines of continents which are cool and temperate often have an abundance of kelp forests, which are important sources of food for marine and freshwater organisms. Chromists can occur in freshwater or saltwater. Some are planktonic and float near the water's surface, while others attach themselves to the bottom of the ocean and become so large they are referred to as forests. There are also many fossils associated with this group because of the ability of the organisms to secrete calcium carbonate, or lime, deposits. Because of the algae's ability to secrete the carbonate, some of this group are thought to be responsible for some coal and petroleum deposits. Red algae are red because of a pigment which absorbs blue light and reflects red light. They live at deeper depths than most algae because of their photosynthetic pigments. Most red algae live in tropical marine environments rather than in fresh water, but some do live in fresh water. Red algae are classified as rhodophyta and are important for different reasons. They are important in the formation of coral reefs because they secrete a shell of carbonate around themselves. Scientists aren't completely sure about how the organisms precipitate the calcium carbonate, but because they do and because fossils have resulted, it is believed that they may have an association with petroleum deposits. In some areas, the red algae, or coralline algae as they are referred to, have been known to contribute more to the composition of reef structure than coral does. In the South Pacific, giant clamshells have been found which contain a pink encrusting material on the outside of their shells. This material is an example of the calcium carbonate which has been deposited by red algae. Red algae can also be an important source of food. Nori is a red algae and is an important source of food for Asians. It has been cultivated in Japan for hundreds of years, but the industry started in the 1950s when a discovery was made about the different stages in the organism's lives. When it was discovered that one phase of the red algae's life cycle was considered an edible stage, cultivation of the organism for food began on a much larger scale. Nori has many benefits as a food source. First, it is easy to cultivate. Second, it is high in vitamin content. And third, it is high in protein content. The last colored algae I want to talk to you about today is the blue-green algae. Blue-green algae are classified as cyanobacteria. They are aquatic bacteria and make their own food. They get their name from a pigment which captures light for the process of photosynthesis. They are considered bacteria and are quite small, usually microscopic. Although they are usually unicellular, they often grow into colonies which are large enough to be seen. They are some of the oldest known fossils in the world and are important providers of nitrogen fertilizer used in bean and rice cultivation. Cyanobacteria live in plants and form the chloroplast with which plants make food. Some of the cyanobacteria are good food sources because they are high in protein and can be cultivated easily in ponds. In the U.S., these organisms are considered health foods, but in the ancient Aztec culture of Mexico, they were a dietary staple. While some of these algae are considered nutritious, others, such as pond scum, are known to be toxic to both humans and animals, and some can cause problems to those who come in contact with them. If you have ever been swimming and later developed swimmer's itch, you have probably encountered some blue-green algae which has caused your skin irritation. On that note, we will conclude today's lecture. See you next class!
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer.
Number 18. What aspect of algae does the professor mainly discuss? Number 19. What does the professor say about brown algae? Number 20. What is the evidence that green algae is diverse in size?
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
And some can cause problems to those who come in contact with them. If you have ever been swimming and later developed swimmer's itch, you have probably encountered some blue-green algae which has caused your skin irritation.
Number 21. What does the professor imply when she says this?
You have probably encountered blue-green algae.
Number 22. Why does the professor mention blue-green algae are classified as cyanobacteria?